web page, and then we're going to be installing it using every CSS selector possible. So as you can see, we have it all working right now. And of course, this site doesn't, really look all that great, but our intention was to use very, every single selector that CSS has to offer and teach them. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed today's video, and make sure to watch till the very end and like and subscribe. Okay, so here we are on our HTML page before any styling whatsoever. As we can see, it's very basic HTML page, but I've tried to include as many of the HTML elements that we've covered on this channel as possible. So we have our paragraphs, we have our anchor, our link, we have our lists, we have our tables, we have our forms, all that good stuff. And yeah, so here's a good overview of all of it. We even have a paragraph that has the content of it written in Italian language. And at the end of it, if you could just get there, I even have a my latest video right there at the bottom of the page that people can just click on and watch right there. So yeah, that's it. And I've used iframes for doing that. So here's the actual code for it. If you want to write it for yourself, you can just pause the video or slow it down. And there's the iframes at the end of the code. I haven't taught them yet on this channel, but I am planning on making a video on iframes, hopefully soon. So yeah, let's start adding some styling to it now. So we use the a star selector for basically selecting all of our tags on all of our HTML elements. So now by doing this, we're making it where our entire web page has a margin of 0 pixels. So if you don't know, our web page comes with a set amount of margin, and we just basically deleted that. So now it's all moved to the very edge of the screen. Now let's use some more common selectors. So first of all, one of the ways to select an HTML element is by using a class. So we can give it a class attribute, and then we can just put a dot before the value, which in this case is a schedule, and then we can just start styling it. We can start styling that tag. So in this case, it's our paragraphs, our p tag, and we're gonna add the background color to it. Background color is gonna be green. And if we go to our web page, we can see that it's changed the entire paragraph, the entire area that that paragraph takes to color green. Now we can do the same thing for IDs. IDs are similar to classes. The only difference is that they take higher priority. So for example, if you give something a class and an ID, the ID is going to be more important. The styling that's given to the ID is going to be more relevant. So now we're going to use that to change our list to something like this. We're going to give the background of yellow, as you can see. So now let's say we want to style both of these with the same background, but we don't want to write it all this code. How do we do that? How do we style both these two both these two classes and also IDs without writing this much code? Well, here's how. First of all, you get the class or the ID, it doesn't matter the order that they're in, and then just put comma between them, and then you just start adding CSS properties like this. So now we're gonna give them both a singular background color, like background green yellow, or yellow green. So now by doing this, we change it where both of them have the same color. And since this code comes after the previous one, it's gonna be the one that's gonna be shown on our web page. So now we can do the same thing for our paragraph. This makes it where all of the paragraph tags in our HTML code are not going to have the color white for their text. And of course, since our background is also white, it basically just removes all of our paragraphs, except the one next to our unordered list, because that one has a background color of green, yellow green. We can do the same thing for our table. basically all of our tags. We can just style them like this. But of course, this mix is where we, choose all of them. For example, all of the tables, all of the paragraphs. So it's not super ideal, but if you want a change for all of your paragraphs, you want to change the font size, your font family, or anything like that, this is a way to do it. So now let's ask a question. How do we do the same thing we did with our schedule and reminders? How do we do that? So pause the video and come back and tell me how and watch how we do it. You want to start both our table and our paragraph here. So do it like this by using comma, and we get color red. We put it in there. But of course, we don't want that, so we're just going to remove it for now. Okay, so now let's go back to our page, and let's say we want to style this this paragraph that's inside of our div. And the way we do that is by making it where we're saying that our paragraph is descendant of div, right? So this makes it where all of the paragraphs that are inside of a div are going to be styled. And if our paragraph is inside another tag, it's still gonna work. It's still gonna be styled as long as that other tag is inside our div. But let's say if we want to do something else. Let's say if we want to install that span right there. So how do we do that? We would say we want to install all the spans that are inside that are actual child of our paragraph. So what this does is basically we're saying that all of the spans that are direct children of our paragraph are going to be styled now. And the difference is that for example, let's say we have our span inside another tag that's inside the paragraph. This way, if we try to say all the spans that are children or directed children of our paragraph, we simply can't style them anymore because our span isn't a direct children of a paragraph, a direct child of a paragraph. So now, let's say we have a div, we have another div inside of our intro div. And this one doesn't really have a class or ID, but there's a paragraph inside of it, right? With some, hello in there, some text. We get the hello up there. Now let's say, we want to install that using a child selector. We do it like this and it just doesn't work. We can't style it. But, if we try to style it using a descendant, we can. Just by saying, all the paragraphs that are a descendant of our intro class, our div intro class. Anyways, let's start styling our span by giving it some margin and some color. Let's say we want blue text color because usually links have the color blue. So now that we're done with that, let's do something else. Let's try styling our paragraph which comes right immediately after our unordered list. Now how do we do that? Well, first of all, we type in unordered list and then we put a plus sign there next to it and then a paragraph. So what this does is basically saying that all the paragraphs that are adjacent to our UL or our unordered list are going to have this CSS property, which is adding a shadow to it. Now keep in mind this only works if your paragraph comes immediately after, not before that, right? Not after another element that's after our UL. It only works when it's immediately after our UL. So if you had a UL and then an LI and then a paragraph, we just couldn't do this anymore. We had to say L ordered list then paragraph. The paragraph is just that adjacent to our ordered list. So now that we've done with that, let's try to start assembling our table. Our table, that's a sibling of our unordered list. Now, keep in mind, both of these are inside the intro, the container div, right? So we can use this to say that, our table that is a sibling of a UL is not going to get this CSS property. In this case, it's going to change its background color. And we could do something similar for other tags in this example, but I thought I should go with this one since it's pretty, easy to see our UL and our table. We could have done the exact opposite, one could have installed our UL using the same method because, they're both siblings. It works both ways. So now let's try to install our schedule class, give it a background color. Something like this. So it looks a little bit better now. I would have probably turned off the opacity, lower the opacity a little bit, but yeah, anyways. Okay, so now let's say we want to select all of our paragraphs that have the class schedule. So how do we do that? We say p for the paragraph element and then dot schedule. So what this does is that it basically selects all of our paragraphs that have the class schedule. So if you had if we give a certain class to multiple elements. For example, if you give an a tag class of a schedule and then paragraph a class of schedule, and we only want to style the paragraph, we do it like this. We use paragraph p dot schedule, so that all of the paragraphs that have this class are now selected. And you can see that that's the paragraph that we were styling. So now let's move on to our next selector. Let's say what we want to do is that we want to select all of our tags that have an ID, right? So this is how we do that. It works kind of like this, except it's only for the elements that were given IDs. So the ones that don't have any ID whatsoever will not be affected, right? But the ones that do will have this CSS property. We're going to change their font weight to bold. So now all of our elements that have an ID are not going to be changed to bold. I'm going to have their font weight changed like this. For example, our UL has an ID, so we can change this font weight like that. But let's say we want to have this is way too general for us. So we want to select our elements that have ID, but not all of them, just some of them, right? Some of them that we like to style. So how do we do that? Well, there's a couple of ways for doing that. First of all, we can try it like this by using the word that's inside of our ID value. So for example, the word remind from reminder, we take that, copy and paste it right there, and now it's going to style our UL. We can also change its color. You can see that it's working just fine, and it's still bold. We can still kept that part. So we can just take a certain part, certain word from the value that we're given to an ID, and just put it in here, and just like that, we can style it. Now let's say we don't want to do that. We don't want to use a word for styling it. How do we do it something in another way? We can use it like this. And what we want to do is we want to take the very end of our ID value. So we're going to take the ERS part and we're going to remove our remind and put our ERS in there. Just copy and paste it. Now we can see that it's still in bold, so it's still working just fine. So now this way you can use a word, you can use the beginning, you can use the ending of your ID to select them. So if you have a multiple IDs that have a certain ending to them, like a certain they end with ESS, and you want to select those and style them, you can do it like this. If you want to style the IDs that have RE at their start, you can do it like this. You're watching our screen right now. And if you put a reminder, it's not working. It only works for the start. If I put my in there, just remove that completely. Now let's change the background color to coral. So what we're doing is that by using this style, we make it where the ID that has my at the start of it is not going to be changed. It's not going to get this CSS property. My followed by a hyphen. And make sure to watch this video multiple times to remember the syntax for this. Another way to style our elements of IDs is by saying what's the first letter that they have. So in this case, we want to style our ID that has L at the beginning of it. Our love. This one right here. This one has the ID of love, I think. Now we're gonna style it by saying the very first letter of it and change this font weight to bold. Now let's say we want to style something using style. 3, 2, 1. Okay, so now let's talk about this selector. We use it to basically select all of our titles that have a certain word in them, right? So for example, let's go ahead and use an example of, to show how this selector doesn't work first. So let's say we want to use road because road is at the beginning of, road to becoming a programmer. Now, this does, the way this works is that you basically, give it a word that's inside of the title, and if it's there, you're going to be able to style it. But you can see that our underline doesn't appear. We can't style it. So what's going on? Here's the thing. The only way this is going to work is if it's the only word that's in our titles. For example, in this case, the love one, love is the only value that's given to our title. So we can just type in love, and it's gonna work. But if you have multiple words in your title, here's something you can do, guys. It will only work if your word has a space around it, right? So if your word has a space on its right and on its left. So, for example, in the previous example, we chose road, right? So road was the very first word in that sentence, and since it's the very first one, it doesn't have any space on its left side, right? So it's not going to work. Now let's show something else. If I type in love coding and I changed its title to love coding, and now I try to use it, we can see that it's not working anymore. Right, and even if you just copy paste the whole love coding part, the whole love coding value to our selector, it's still not gonna work because again, it will only work for a word, a single word, and that single word needs to be either the entire value or it has to have a space around it, both on its right and on its left side. So now we can see that the styling is no longer there, even though we just copy and pasted the entire value. But if you change it to love again, it's gonna be there. See? So that's it for that one. Let's move on to the next selector. Now if you change it to low, it's not gonna work because it has to be an actual word, not just a couple of letters. But anyway, so now let's try to style our form, or more specifically our inputs. So how do we do that? But here's the thing. And there are a couple of ways. First of all, let's talk about one of the easiest ones. We have an input that's set to disabled, right? So how do we style that? Well, it's real simple. We just all right. So let's just go ahead and style it just like this, and we type disabled, and this is going to be referring to our disabled input, and we can type input in there as well, and I'm going to show you how that looks. But if you just type disable, it's going to work as well. And if you want to just add some margin to it, so now if we go back to our site, we can see that our disabled input actually has some margin around it, and it's moved a bit. And we can do something similar to this for other input types as well. So let's choose checked. Now this is pretty self-explanatory, but in case you don't know, checked is basically our input types that have been checked. So for example, let's say our radio buttons that have been checked, they're gonna now have a margin. And if you uncheck them, we can just remove their margin. So for example, our male option has margin, and if you remove it, our female now has that CSS property, has margin. So we can do the same thing right here. So by doing that, we just made our site a little bit more dynamic. So whenever you choose one of our inputs, they're gonna get a little margin added to them. So now in this case, we can also style it like this by saying we want all of our inputs that have the type radio to be that are also disabled to get this property. Now, since we only have one of disabled input and it has the type radio and it's an input, it's gonna basically do the exact same thing, but it's better to do it like that. The second way and the latter way, because if we're gonna be writing more complex code, of course, so it's better to keep that in mind. Now we can do something else for our empty inputs as well. We can change our background color. Let's say do something like aqua. So now if we go to our site, we can see that they have their background color changed. The ones that are empty, that we haven't given them any values. And again, these are all referring to our inputs, so keep that in mind. Now we can use focus. So how does focus work? Well, here's the thing. Focus is basically for our inputs that the user has selected or is about to type something in, and that they're choosing whether or not to select or not select, or check or uncheck, or type something, or delete something, right? So for example, our name, here's how it looks like. You can just add some margin to it. It works for all of our input types that are on focus. So that's it for all of these. There's just one more selector left for forms, and it's the enable one. This is one of the more general ones, because basically it's the exact opposite of disabled. Disabled, let's us install the ones that are disabled. Enabled is basically anything that's not disabled. So it's kind of the opposite of the first one. You can just add some underline to it, so now you can see that all of them have underlines now. All of our inputs. You can type something and we can see that it has some underline right there. So yeah, this is basically how we install, and you can see it's even there on the button as well. This is how we install our forms, by using enable, disable, checked, that sort of thing. So now let's move on to the next section. Okay, so now let's talk about the first selector, right? So there's a bunch of them, so pay attention. We're gonna start with first letter. What first letter does is basically it makes it where we can select the very first letter of our paragraphs, right? So keep in mind this works for all of our paragraphs in our HTML code, and we only select the very first letter of them, right? So we're gonna add some padding to them right now. As we can see, our I's, the very first letter in our paragraphs, because we have a bunch of paragraphs that start with I, right? So for example, this one has some padding to its left. It's no longer right next to the edge of the screen. This one as well. So we just added a padding to the very first letter, nothing else. Padding to the left. So now, if you remove that, we can see that it's again at the edge of the screen. Now we're going to add it back. So another first selector is going to be, we're going to see it right here, it's going to be first child. So what does first child do? First child basically makes it where we select all the, in this case, paragraphs that are the very first children of their parent element. So, for example, our first paragraph, right, that's a child of our div. In this case, this hello right here, this paragraph is gonna be styled with the, it's gonna have text color changed to white. Now, keep in mind, if that paragraph wasn't the very first child, if the first child was an anchor or something else, then that no longer would work, right? Because it's not the first child, so it doesn't really matter what we put, behind it. Now we're gonna move on to the next line. It works very similar to first letter, and as you can see, the syntax for it is even very similar. But instead of styling the very first letter, we're gonna be styling the very first line. So if our paragraphs have multiple lines, we would be only styling the first one. And we're just going to add some padding to it. As you can see right here, the entire line now gets the padding, not just the very first letter. You can see this one as well, some padding. Okay, now that's done. Let's move on to the next first selector. This one's gonna be a first of type, first of type, yeah, right. So first of type is kind of similar to first child, but I'm gonna tell you the difference. First of type basically makes it where we select all of our paragraphs that are the first of their type inside that have a parent, right? So for example, not the very first paragraph in our code, or not the very first paragraph in our code, just the very first paragraph that has a parent. So for example, if our paragraph wasn't our very first child inside of our div, but it was still the very first paragraph, or maybe it was the second element, we would still be able to style it using this one. Whereas in the first child, we wouldn't be able to do it because our paragraph wasn't the very first child, right? But in this case, with first of type, we can still style it even if it's not actually the first child, as long as it's the very first paragraph, right? Not that's a children of our div, that has a parent. So now let's move on to our form again, and we're going to talk about how we're going to style that. So pay attention to that ID. So now what we want to do is that we want to make it where if the user hovers their mouse over our, if they're using it on desktop, on our submit button, we're gonna have its properties change. So for example, we're gonna have it changed its color to gold. You can see if I move my mouse over it, it's gonna work. We can do something similar for activated as well, once the user has selected it, not just hover when they've actually selected it. But I didn't talk about that in this video, but you can do that as well. Just change hover to activate it. It has very similar syntax. And of course, if you want to be more exact, we should probably do it like this, input, and then that has the type of submit. So if you had multiple that if you had more complex HTML page, this would be a more proper way to do it. But of course, our previous code does the exact same thing. It's just this is a more proper way to write our code. So you can see that it's still working just fine, like we wanted to. So no problem here. So now let's move on to our next selector, and it's gonna be number, right? So we want to select our number. But what are we gonna do it for? This time we're gonna go with valid. Right, so here's the thing for valid. Basically, let's say our input, or in this case, our input that's a number, has certain, requirements, has like a max and min value or something like that, right? So as long as the value that the user gives it to it, is within their range, is valid, it's gonna have, background color of green. If it's invalid, it's gonna change to its previous one, which was blue or aqua, I think. Now if it's which we can say if it's invalid, for example, we set the max value to like 10, and then the user inputs something like 11 or 13 in this case to get this. But if you bring it down to 10, you can see that's working because the max value is 10. If you go for 20, it's no longer working. And we can do something very similar by using in and out range as well. So I'm going to show that right now. Okay, so now let's talk about in and out range. So let's show how this works. So if I go in range and then add some text decoration, like let's say underline, what's gonna happen is that we're gonna be giving our inputs are that has the type number that when it's in range, when it's between 1 to 10, it's gonna have an underline. Right, but the problem is that even when you go over 10, for example 11, it still has the underline. So how do we fix that? Well, this is where the out of range selector comes in. So we're just gonna copy and paste this because it has the exact same syntax, and we're just gonna change this to line through. And I'm gonna show you why I'm doing this. Right, so if I run my page, you see that line through isn't there, but if I when it's in range, we're gonna have the line through. Right, but now let's add you can see that it's working. Now let's add our out of range and see what happens now. So when it's in range, we get the underline, right, as we should. But when we go over 10, for example 11, we no longer have the underline. We just get the line through. Right, so that's it for valid, invalid, in range, and out of range. And they're kind of similar, but work a little bit differently. Now let's use lang. So we use the lang attribute to basically, say what language our, or in this case, our paragraph is in. Right? So for example, it's in Italy now. So we're gonna use IT, and if it was something else, we just use the very first letter. For example, if it was English, we would use EN, right? So now we're gonna use that to style it like this. We're gonna change it to italic, change its text style. And if it was Russian, I believe it would be RU. Now let's try to install our table row. So let's try to install our table. So we're gonna be using the env child. Now, how does this work? I'll talk about this in my table video. If you haven't watched that, go watch that one. But for now, basically this is how it works. We're gonna be selecting all of the table rows that are even, that are the even if table row, basically. All right, so let's go and check our table now. After this, after selecting this color. Right, so for example, all of our even table rows are gonna now get that styling. We can do something similar for odd as well. The odd numbered table rows. We can change its color to something like this. So now this way we can install our odd and even table rows differently. So our table can get a nice look. Of course, I did a much better job at this in my table video. So I would recommend you go and watch that one instead. I explain these in much greater detail in that video. These two. So now let's move on to our next selector. I don't know what I'm doing here, honestly. Okay, so now we're going to be talking about the last selectors, right? They're kind of similar to our first. For example, we're going to be using the last child. It works very similar to the first child, except now we're going to be selecting the last child. For example, our paragraph that is also the last child of a parent. And so that would be in this case. Again, background color change to green. But of course, I don't think we have a paragraph that's the first, that's the last, or maybe we do. I don't know. Let's see where this video goes. Oh, and guys, tell me in the comments section if you like this, this sort of video, or when I'm just live coding, when I'm coding and talking, or I talk over my code. Tell me which one you guys prefer. Honestly, I think for these longer videos, I think me typing and coding would be better. First, we're gonna try margin, and we're gonna get all of this. So basically, we get to install the last child. So these two are the last children. So now we're gonna get these insane margins around them. I use margin to make it more obvious because it was kind of hard to see which one were the last children in the previous CSS with the previous CSS properties. But 100 margins did the job. Uh, So now we can do something similar for last of type. Again, very similar to the first of type, except it selects the last paragraph, the last paragraph inside of that has a parent inside of our div in this case. We're going to have its background color changed to black. Of course, the text is also black, so that means that we're not going to be able to actually see the text. So we're going to change the color of the text to white, and we get something like this. And we're almost done, guys. We made it for most of these selectors. And I'm gonna change this margin to something that makes more sense, like 2 pixels. So anyways, and now we're gonna be starting our li. What's li for? Our list, and we're gonna be installing that by using this selector. If I can actually get this code right. So we're gonna be using this to the nth child. So and we're gonna put 1 inside of the parentheses. Right? Great, not gay. So now we can make it where the very first li right now we can change its background color gray. So if we show something like 4, we can get the fourth one, right? We can just choose anything we want. Of course, I just kind of go with the first one. We can do something else kind of similar by using env of type, right? So this way, again, in this case, it's not going to make that much of a difference because we're just selecting LIs, right? But we can use env of type to select the second LIs. So we're going to have its background color to change to white. We can do something similar for env last of child and last of type as well. So again, these aren't too complicated. Honestly, I would say just have to remember the syntax and remember some of the quirky stuff that they have. For example, how the title selector worked, how the in and out of range selectors work. But basically, once you get the syntax right by practicing it enough, I think this can really help you coding. You no longer have to type these classes and give everything IDs and classes. You can just master these selectors, which can take time. It can make your coding process a lot smoother. And you can see that we solved the last type and the last child. But of course, I had to use 1 and 2 in their parentheses because in this case, the last type and child are the same thing because we're using LIs. So I think that about covers it. Let's go back and look at our code again. And we can see that, we pretty much just solved everything, I think. I don't think we missed much. Alright, just one more would be only of type. So only of type makes it where, for example, in this code or in our HTML code, we have just one h3, right? And we're gonna be installing that that exact h3. We're gonna be using the only of type. it's kind of similar to the first of type and last of type, except it only works when there's just more than one of that element. So we couldn't use it for our paragraphs because we had multiple paragraphs inside of all of our divs. So that was that. Now there's this one where we can select our paragraph because it's the only child of our div. Alright, so let's go with only child. Again, this will only work when a parent element has only one child, and we want to select just that one child. And we can see that we change this text font size, not text size. And finally, I think this is the last one. It's gonna be root, where we just change the properties for the basically our entire web page. Yeah, pretty much we just gave the entire web page a background color of blue. And we're gonna lower its opacity a bit so it looks a little bit better. So yeah, guys, that's it for all of the CSS selectors. I'm just use all of them in one single web page. So hope you enjoyed this video. And make sure to like, subscribe, comment down below if you had any troubles, and make sure to watch this video again if you actually forget anything.